I am Brendan the Navigator. I sailed the Atlantic and the northern seas long before Columbus and the Viking tribes. My greatest journey was to the New World in the year of our Lord 570. There we spread the faith and left our mark on the continent. Follow me now on my life's voyage.
In the great pantheon of New World explorers, no name is more intriguing or clouded in controversy than that of St. Brendan of Ireland. The legend has persisted through centuries in the form of the Navigatio, an Irish saga which details Brendan's journey to the land of the saints far beyond the Atlantic. Even early cartographers and explorers gave credence to the legend, and now there may be archaeological proof that the land of the saints could be North America.
I was born in County Kerry in 489 AD in a seafaring village not far from our island of pearls and the vast ocean beyond. I was meant for special hands at birth. At one, I was placed with St. Ita of Killeedy, who took charge of my ecclesiastic epiphany. Killeedy was our home amid the beautiful Kerry countryside. There I learned charity, a simple life, and a steadfast belief in Him.
St. Brendan was educated by Nevida, or St. Ita. During his very early years, from what I can find out, that from the age of just 1 he was fostered with St. Ita. But then fosterage was a very common occurrence with the old Irish families during the early Christian period and even up until fairly recent times. And he stayed with her until I think he was about 5, and then he moved on to further his studies elsewhere. And then Nevida reappears in his life when, after his first attempt to make the voyage in his Navigatio, the big sea voyage that he made, that it failed. And he went back to St. Ita, and she told him that the problem was his boat. So he followed his teacher's advice, and it worked out well.
My baptism in the faith came under the watchful eye of St. Ita in a little pasture well not far from Ardfert. After learning the rudiments of a dedicated life from Ita, Bishop Burke of Kerry took an interest in me. Years of study in his sanctuary manifested itself into a worthy and steadfast disciple.
We have records of Bishop Burke as the first bishop of this area. He would have known St. Patrick and was probably consecrated bishop by St. Patrick in the 5th century. And his reputation for sanctity spread throughout this area. And we believe that he baptized Brendan and that he later ordained Brendan as a priest and possibly as a bishop. It's 1400 years ago. But it's remarkable how much of the memory has endured, and in legend and also in place names and in monuments and so on, that churches and ruins of churches and so on, all of which testify without doubt that a great early Christian settlement existed in this area and for many miles around here. And so extensive that Brendan and Erk must have been people of tremendous influence throughout the area.
With Bishop Erk's assistance, I framed my own monastic rule. Upon ordination, I gathered some brethren and settled on land just 5 miles from my birth in Ardfert. Our genuine love of new learning brought us fame and followers.
William Shakespeare is the world's greatest playwright. His reputation and popularity some 400 years hence have reached immeasurable plateaus. There are theaters, festivals, and libraries all over the world that have devoted all of their resources to the preservation and the performance of the bard. How then did this simple rustic from the English countryside of Stratford-upon-Avon become the continent's greatest playwright and reach literary stardom in America? Shakespeare was born in April 1564, almost certainly in the house in Henley Street in Stratford-upon-Avon, which is honored today. Shakespeare's Stratford was a leafy riverside town formed on a medieval grid of wide streets. Just to the north was the Forest of Arden, not a forest in the sense of being dense with trees, but a broad pastoral open land. The Stratford of the young Shakespeare was also a thriving town with good buildings and even touches of something finer in Holy Trinity Church. The impressive parish church stands to the south of the town by the banks of Avon, its nave, tower, and spire rising high above the trees. Shakespeare's education was also centered in Stratford. He went to the grammar school, where he was the beneficiary of as good an education as any grammar school boy in England. He was taught by well-paid Oxford men and, in fact, was better educated than his peers at Eton. On November 28, 1582, William Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway were married. There was life and the family trade in Stratford for a period. Then, after the birth of the couple's twins, Hamnet and Judith, we lose track of Shakespeare for approximately 7 years until he resurfaces in London. His route from Stratford to London, where he appears in 1592, would have taken him through the sheep-filled rolling hills of the Cotswolds, along any number of several routes, until he reached the Thames Valley. When Shakespeare, his wife, and 3 children settled in London, he was probably just 21. His exact arrival date and initial occupation are not known. Even what plays he wrote first, when he wrote them, and how they were received are still a mystery. What is certain is that he brought to London a countryman's love and acutely observed knowledge of the landscape he knew best. Shakespeare's London was a crowded city of just under 250,000 inhabitants, all crammed north of the Thames. The medieval Cathedral of St. Paul stood on the highest point. South of the river was Southwark and the bankside attractions, which included the theaters and eventually the Globe.
He came down to London as a young man. He joined a company, we don't know in what capacity. There are apocryphal stories of him holding the horses outside the theatre. Did he join a group of young people and wait to play a devil and get a free entrance into the theatre by climbing up through the stage floor? There's so many possibilities, aren't there? All we have to say is that he joined a company, he started playing, he was an actor with that company, and he turned his hand to writing. I imagine, I have no proof, that he was an actor before he was a playwright, and maybe decided, like some of the other actors who are writing plays, to turn his hand to writing vehicles for himself and for other actors in the company. Well, we're sitting in a reconstruction of the Globe Theatre that was originally built in 1599. And Shakespeare was part of a company called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. And a group of the actors from the Lord Chamberlain's Men got together and pooled money and hired a builder, Peter Street, to build this theatre from scratch. And so this was an actor's theatre. And Shakespeare, he wrote plays for this theatre. He acted on this stage and he owned a share in the theatre, so he was actually quite a clever man. He wrote plays, sold them to his own theatre, and then paid himself money to act in them. So here we are, we're in his home, we're in his workplace, the very workplace, the very birthplace of some of his greatest plays. Lear, Othello, Macbeth, Hamlet, all had their first performances in this very theatre.
Since 2 murders have been performed, too terrible for the ear. The time has been, the rains were out, the man would die.
In its heyday, Shakespeare lived near the Globe, but he'd also not forgotten Stratford. He bought the Great House of New Place, the second largest dwelling in Stratford, and apparently moved his family into it in 1597. Unfortunately, New Place was pulled down by its vexatious owner in 1759. Today we see the Nash House next door, the home of Thomas Nash, the first husband of Shakespeare's granddaughter, Elizabeth Hall. Adjoining it are the gardens and foundations of New Place. It's been said that Shakespeare died here and was eventually laid to rest in Holy Trinity. Unquestionably, the greatest monument to Shakespeare lies not in Holy Trinity, but in the performances of his works that have continued over 400 years after his death. One world-renowned repertory theater that's been called the Keeper of the Shakespearean Flame is Stratford's Royal Shakespeare Company.
The Royal Shakespeare Company is totally unique. We're this country's last remaining repertoire ensemble company. Now what that means essentially is at the beginning of a year we open up gradually over a period of time anything up to 15 shows in Stratford-upon-Avon, and they play throughout a whole year in these 3 theatres.
And I shall here abide the hourly shot of angry eyes, not comforted to live, but that there is this jewel in the world that I may see again.
My queen, my mistress. Oh, lady, weep no more. I will remain the loyalest husband that did e'er pride troth. My residence in Rome at one Philario's, friend to my father, thither write my queen, and with mine eyes I'll drink the words you send, though ink be made of gall.
Be brief, I pray you. If the king come, I shall incur I know not how much of his displeasure.
Yet I'll move him to walk this way.
Cymbeline, I think, is a very special play. I love the play. It's a play, to me, about healing, about people going on a very long and difficult journey, about a society going on a long and difficult journey, and many of the rifts, the fractures, being resolved in one of the most beautiful last scenes in the whole of Shakespeare's canon. It's got an odd reputation. People think it's a difficult play, but it certainly isn't, and that's not our experience with our audiences in Stratford at all. I've cut the play, certainly, but I think we've staged it in a very, very appealing way. I think it's an evening that is emotionally wonderfully uplifting.
The link between the Royal Shakespeare Company and the United States goes back a very long way. It goes back until the 1920s, when we first started as a small festival theatre company, when we first started touring to the States. That's gradually increased over the years. More recently, we've done state-to-state tours of Adrian Noble's production of Midsummer Night's Dream. And so we've done a real density of touring over the Atlantic in recent years.